When people go to see a neuropsychologist, many times they're going in for neuropsychological testing. And that word test might make some people a little bit nervous. They might have negative associations with testing from when they were a kid, and maybe they didn't do so well at school, or maybe they always were nervous when it came to standardized tests. But I try to put people at ease and let them know that, hey, it's okay. Some of the things that we do might be pretty hard, but some of them actually might be easy. But whatever the case may be, I just want them to do their best, because it's my job to try to see how their brains work, because everyone's brains work differently. And that is the foundational concept behind neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is kind of a common sense thing when you think about it. Not everybody's brains work the same. But often we kind of take for granted that people are going to think like us and behave like us. And when they don't behave and think the way that we believe they would, sometimes that can lead to an awkward interpersonal interaction. And sometimes people get nervous or maybe even scared. This is not an unusual occurrence when people first meet someone with autism spectrum disorder. Autism, as the name suggests, is a spectrum disorder, which means that there is a wide variety of presentations. I have a cousin who has autism, and I have a nephew who has autism. I have many patients that I've diagnosed with autism through the ADOS. I've had other patients who have already had a diagnosis of autism who come to see me for something else. And each one of those individuals has a very different way that they behave. So just because you know one person who has autism does not mean that the next person that you meet who has autism will behave in the exact same way. And when people behave in ways that we don't expect, like I said, it can be a little bit awkward. But awkwardness isn't a big problem unless it gets escalated. And sometimes that happens when people don't know what to do. That was the case with Charles Kinsey. Now, Charles Kinsey actually does not have autism. He was a therapist for a young man who did have autism. His patient was in the middle of the street playing with a toy truck. Someone in the neighborhood saw this and thought that the behavior was concerning, and so they decided that they were going to call the police. The police, not really understanding what was going on, came with guns drawn. There's an old saying that goes, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And if the only tool that you have is a gun, well, we can see what happens then. Mr. Kinsey was laying in the middle of the street with his hands up, and the police actually wound up shooting at him and hit him. Now, they claim later that they weren't actually trying to hit Mr. Kinsey. They were aiming for his patient. And I don't think that that makes things better. That actually makes it a little bit worse. And even though Mr. Kinsey was able to eventually walk away from this incident, he survived it. He did have to go to the hospital and he had rehabilitation, and this was an avoidable situation. If only there was someone else who had responded instead of the police. Although the situation with Mr. Kinsey was tragic, at least he was able to escape with his life. That was not the case with Elijah McClain. From what we're told, Elijah was walking home from the store when someone observed him doing something that they felt was odd. We're not exactly sure what was so concerning, but they called the police, and when the police arrived on the scene, that interaction turned deadly. I don't know for sure whether or not Elijah had autism spectrum disorder. I was not his psychologist. However, listening to the audio, a lot of the things that he said and the way that he said them, the prosody of his voice and the cadence of his sentences was very reminiscent of individuals that I know who present in ways that are not neurotypical. And the fact that his behavior was not what the police expected made them do some things that they probably wouldn't have done had they really had an understanding of the whole concept of neurodiversity. We need to change the way that we approach mental health issues in our society. If people see someone behaving in ways that they think is truly concerning to them, they should have an option to call someone besides the police. Mental health professionals should be the ones who go to the scene to assess whether or not the behavior is indeed concerning and whether further action needs to be taken. Until that happens, I'm going to continue to be afraid, not just for society as a whole, but for the people that I care about. At the very beginning of this, I told you that I have a nephew who has autism. Now, I have a lot of wonderful nieces and nephews that I love very dearly and who I worry about because they're going to be growing up in this society as people of color where individuals often discriminate against those who are different than them. But in addition to being a Black boy who's already very tall, who will eventually grow up to be a Black man, my nephew is also a Black boy with autism who will grow up to be a Black man with autism. And I'm afraid that if he has an interaction with the police, they might not understand the concept of neurodiversity, and he might not understand what they mean by wanting him to comply. We need reform because I don't want my nephew to wind up as the next Elijah McClain.